Who raised you more, your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
My engagement toast was ruined the moment my sister cut across my breath and said, "Sorry, guess all eyes are on me again," and the way people chuckled told me more about the balance of power in my own family than any therapist could have in a year. Because everyone who should have stepped in to protect the moment shrugged like it was nothing, and I stood there with a glass that felt heavier than it should while my fiancé tried to keep smiling, and my mom did that tight laugh she does when she is embarrassed but will never admit it, and my dad stared at the cake like it might offer instructions. And my aunt patted my arm as if I were a child who had dropped a toy rather than a woman who had just had a milestone stolen in front of a room that apparently thought stealing was a party trick. I did not cry, which surprised even me, because I am the one who usually swallows it and apologizes to keep the temperature down, but something clicked in a quiet way, like a door latch in a hallway you thought was locked forever. And instead of begging for attention like I have done since I was little while Brittany performed and our parents clapped, I smiled in a way that made David look at me with that careful side glance he gives when he knows I am deciding something that will not be undone. And I said thank you to everyone, and I thanked Brittany for her contribution, and I made a small toast of my own that was so polite it hurt, and then I ended the night early with the kind of hug that tells people nothing and everything at once. On the drive home, David asked me if I was okay, and I told him I was not okay, but I was done being not okay in the same old way, because if I let this pass, then the wedding would be next, and then the baby shower would be next. And then every promotion or setback or surgery or hospital visit would be another stage for Brittany to debut a new storyline while I held the microphone cord and smiled, and I could feel how tired that future made me. The kind of tired that does not go away with sleep. And David squeezed my hand and said he was with me, and we sat in that clear, quiet couples make when they are planning without saying the plan out loud. Back at the apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up the invitation file we had been dragging our feet on because we could not agree on paper thickness and fonts. Which is funny in hindsight because it turns out clarity is heavier than cardboard and more legible than any calligraphy. And I added a simple insert that matched the style of the invite so perfectly it looked official, and at the top it said, "House Rules." Which sounds cute until you read it, and then it reads like a boundary drawn with a permanent marker. We kindly ask that guests refrain from surprise announcements, gender reveals, pregnancy reveals, engagement reveals, job reveals, health reveals, or any personal news not directly tied to the couple or the ceremony. We love you, we support you, and we promise to attend your milestones with full attention when it is your day, just as we ask you to attend ours with full attention when it is ours. If you feel tempted to redirect the spotlight, consider that there will be a microphone mute and a music cue and a coordinator authorized to escort anyone who forgets the purpose of the gathering. Thank you for helping us create a drama-free celebration. I did not mention Brittany by name, because the most honest kind of honesty is the kind that does not need a label, and anyone who knew our family patterns would understand without a footnote, and anyone who did not would simply think, that is smart. And keep it moving, and David read it once, looked at me, and said it was clear and fair and overdue, and then he added one small line at the end that made me want to kiss him on the spot. We appreciate respecting this guideline as much as you appreciate not being called out publicly, which is the sort of sentence that exposes nothing and everything simultaneously. We exported the file with the new insert, and because I know how this family operates on missed texts and unread emails and stories that conveniently disappear, I uploaded it to a shared link that logs opens and forwards so there would be no confusion later. And I drafted a cheerful note that sounded so normal you could put it on a billboard. We are thrilled to celebrate with you. Here is the invitation and information card. Please share with any relatives we might have missed. We cannot wait to see you. And then I watched the little cursor blink over the send button while David rubbed my back and said that it was my call and my day and my right to keep it my day. And I press send because I've learned that no one hands you boundaries as a gift. You build them and you enforce them and you pay for them up front, and the interest is peace. I turned off my phone because I did not need a chorus of immediate takes, and I slept better than I have in months, and in the morning I made coffee before checking anything because I wanted to meet whatever was waiting with a steady hand. And then I opened the family chat and saw more notifications than I have ever seen stacked in one place, and before I could even scroll, Brittany called me with the kind of scream that empties a room, demanding to know who I thought I was to send that invitation and that card to every relative, including her future in-laws, and if I was prepared for what would happen next. And I told her I was finally prepared for a lot of things as of last night, and then I asked her which part of the card upset her, the rule or the possibility of the mute button. When Brittany's name lit up my phone and her voice came through like a siren that refused to fade, demanding to know whether I had actually sent that invitation with the house rules to every relative, including her future in-laws and their very proper church friends who apparently would now assume she was the kind of person who grabs microphones at other people's parties. I let her run out of breath while I scrolled through the family chat that had detonated overnight into a chaos of cousins saying finally, aunts typing that they wished we had done something like this years ago because surprises at formal dinners are tacky, and my mother writing that this was unnecessary and humiliating and could we please retract it before it damages relationships that are already delicate, which is her word when she means we all need to tiptoe around Brittany so she can keep breaking things without having to pick up even one shard. I told Brittany that nothing in the insert used her name or her history, and that if she felt identified then maybe what she was feeling was recognition instead of accusation, which is a grown-up sensation that comes with the joy of being an adult who has patterns and consequences, and she responded with the kind of dramatic promise that used to send me into appeasement mode, announcing that she would not be coming to my wedding if she was going to be muzzled like some kind of dog, and that I would be very sorry when people started asking why she was absent and what that meant about me, and I said that people could ask and I would answer with the truth, that she chose not to attend because she could not agree to a basic expectation we were applying to everyone equally, which was the moment she hung up because the only thing she hates more than not being the star is hearing her own behavior described accurately. While my phone vibrated with my mother's follow-up calls and my father's single line that read, "Call your mother," which is the whole story of their marriage in 3 words, David poured me coffee and asked what I wanted to do next. And I told him I wanted to end the years of back-channel negotiations by moving the conversation into daylight where polished adults have to say yes or no to plain requests instead of pretending they are confused by tone. And he nodded in that steady way he has that. Says he will help me carry whatever I pick up, and we drafted a program update that sounded cheerful and sane and also locked the door we had just closed, because we announced a simple sign-up for toasts and speeches managed by the coordinator with time limits and a list of pre-approved names, and we added a friendly checkbox to the digital RSVP that said, "I will honor the no surprises guideline," which meant people would either click it and follow it or decline and make their stance visible. And as a final touch, I slipped in a line that said, "Special thanks to Emily's sister Brittany for encouraging us to put our expectations in writing so everyone can relax." A sentence that was true in spirit if not in intent, and that made it socially expensive for her to publicly oppose boundaries she had just been praised for supporting. The chat reacted instantly in a way that felt like someone had opened a window in a room that had been collecting old air for years, with cousins adding their names to the toast list and joking about sticking to time, and uncles saying they were relieved to skip speeches entirely, and a couple of older relatives thanking us for spelling out what everyone secretly hopes for at family events. And then my mother called to say that while she admired the organization, she thought the shout-out to Brittany was passive-aggressive and that it might inflame things further, which was her careful coded way of saying Brittany was screaming in her kitchen while my father pretended to look for the good knives. So could I please take the post down for the sake of peace? And I told her that peace without boundaries is not peace, it is unpaid labor, and I would not be providing it anymore. And she made a disappointed noise that belongs in a museum of emotional antiques and said she hoped I understood that families are complicated, to which I said yes, that is exactly why we are simplifying this one event. Brittany did not reply in the chat because she prefers shadows and private audiences, but she did what I knew she would do, which was move to a platform where she could control the narrative for a few hours before reality caught up. So she posted a vague update about a controlling bride and a silenced sister and an invitation designed to humiliate a family member who had only ever tried to bring joy to gatherings, which her friends liked with heart reactions because they do not know my history. And her fiancé's mother shared with a comment about praying for unity, and for a moment I felt the old pull to explain myself to strangers who only know me through Brittany's monologues. And then I remembered that I had already prepared for this exact move by keeping copies of the past 5 years of messages where Brittany admitted she loved the thrill of dropping news in rooms that weren't hers because it felt like winning. And I realized that I did not need to explain anything now because the truth would do that for me when the time was right. So I sent one more message to the family, short by my standards and still friendly, saying that if anyone had concerns about the guideline they could call me directly and that I would be happy to talk it through. And then I texted the rehearsal dinner venue to confirm that the coordinator could run the toast list exactly as planned and that the audio team understood the mute function would be used without warning if needed. And when David squeezed my hand and asked whether I felt ready for whatever Brittany would try next, I told him that I did not know exactly what shape her retaliation would take, but I did know that the next time she tried to turn my milestone into her stage, she would find the lights pointed somewhere she did not expect. Which is why, when my phone buzzed again with an unknown number and a message that simply read, "Call me about your sister's post," or "We are reconsidering the rehearsal policy," I knew the first real test of this plan had just arrived and that if I answered, everything would accelerate. The number that had warned me to call or lose the rehearsal policy turned out to belong to the venue manager, a woman named Laura who spoke in that strained professional tone people use when they have already fielded too many calls about a situation they did not create. And she explained that someone claiming to be my sister had reached out first thing in the morning to report that our event might become volatile because the bride was threatening to mute and humiliate a family member with a history of anxiety. And while they did not police family drama, they did care about safety and guest experience, so could I please reassure them that no one would be bullied with a microphone? Which made me laugh in that tired way that sounds like crying if you are not in the room, and I told her that the only bullying that had ever happened in our family was the kind people call charm when it comes from the pretty one with the louder voice. And that my insert was about preventing exactly the kind of public ambush that turns a party into an audience for one, and when I forwarded her the guideline and the context, including Brittany's vague post about a controlling bride who silences joyful sisters, Laura exhaled so audibly I could picture her rubbing her temples, and she said that made perfect sense and that, in fact, they could help by setting the microphones to push-to-talk with the coordinator holding the talk button so no one could grab a live mic. And they would lock the AV laptop with a code so only the coordinator could load files, and they would put a paper sign up at check-in that matched the digital list to avoid last-minute, "Oh, I already told the bride" tricks, which sounded so neat and adult that I felt my shoulders drop for the first time all week. Brittany, predictably, did not appreciate being structurally prevented from a dramatic entrance, so while I was on the phone with the venue she escalated in the only way she knows how. By gathering her little orbit and feeding them a story that centers her as the bruised hero, which meant my mother began calling and repeating circles about reconciliation and optics and whether I had considered how this would look to Brittany's future in-laws who were very proper, and my father sent a single line that said, "We love you both," which landed like a poem about neutrality written by someone who never had to pay for the cleanup. And I told David that I could spend the next month defending myself against a script I did not write, or I could move the truth into a place where it would be seen without me narrating it. And he said he would rather chew glass than watch me explain myself to people who did not want to listen, so if I was going to move the truth, he would carry the box. I opened my backups and collected the receipts I had been too polite to use for years, and I do not mean the ugly gossip that would make me look petty. I mean Brittany's own texts and voice notes where she bragged that dropping news at other people's events felt like winning because everyone gets bored unless there is a surprise, and the messages where she said she would save it for the crowd when she had a new boyfriend or a new apartment or a new anything, and the night she admitted she had announced her brand collaboration during our cousin's baby shower because no one will remember a cake, but they will remember a reveal, and I screen recorded them because people love to claim that screenshots are doctored. And I organized them with dates that matched public posts so a person who barely knows us could follow the pattern without me saying a word. And then I built a simple slide deck labeled Run of Show and Thank Yous that began with order of toasts and vendor credits and a note about our charity donation in honor of a relative we had lost, and several slides later, tucked in where only a person reading forward would find them, I placed short quotes in a clean font with the date and the words from Brittany's messages at the bottom. Not shaded red or highlighted or annotated, just presented like the kind of truth that does not need lipstick. I brought the file to the venue in person because I wanted to look people in the eye while I asked for help, and Laura and the coordinator looked at the deck and at me and at each other, and Laura said she understood exactly what I was trying to do, which was to end the whisper network by making the pattern visible without yelling, and the coordinator said she could run the rehearsal slideshow straight from the house laptop and that she would title the file with the boring logistics name So No one would think to open it in advance, and if the room saw the quotes while Brittany waited to speak, that was not a malfunction, that was timing, and I thanked them in a way that felt like paying down an old debt to myself. Because revenge that lands cleanly often depends on the right audience. I sent a warm note to Brittany's future in-laws inviting them to the rehearsal dinner and framing it as a chance for our families to know one another in a quieter setting since the wedding day would go fast. And I added that we would be keeping toasts short and respectful to save time for conversation, which I knew would read as pleasant to them and as a boundary to anyone reading the thread aloud to Brittany, and I also called our officiant to confirm that if anyone attempted to hijack the ceremony, he would redirect with a scripted line that referenced our house rules with a light touch, because even if Brittany managed to wriggle through one gate, she would find the next one closed. I finished the afternoon by sending Brittany a text that felt like a gift and a trap at the same time, telling her that I had added her to the rehearsal toast list for a 2-minute thank you right after Dad, and that I thought it would mean a lot to the family if she kept it simple and supportive, and then I put my phone face down on the counter and waited. Because if she accepted the slot, she would commit herself to the moment where the room would see her own words before hers, and if she refused, she would look petty against an invitation to speak, and when her reply finally came through, a long bubble that began with conditions and ended with make it 5 minutes, I have things to say. I could almost hear the click of a door I had quietly arranged closing behind her while she kept walking forward, smiling. I walked into the rehearsal dinner with that strange calm that shows up when you have already lived through the worst version of a moment in your head and decided you will not be begging anyone for decency this time. And the coordinator met me at the door with the clipboard and the warm professional smile of a woman who has seen every flavor of family theater, and she confirmed in a low voice that the microphones were set to push to talk, that the laptop was locked to the deck labeled Run of Show and Thank Yous, and that Brittany had checked in and requested to be moved from a short toast to a longer closing statement, which she had politely declined with the kind of sunny firmness you save for toddlers with sharp objects. So the order would stand and the button would live in her hand alone, and when I nodded she squeezed my elbow once, as if to say that gravity was on my side tonight. The first rounds of clinking glasses were ordinary in the way you only appreciate after a few years of chaos, because people kept to time and said kind things and sat down without auditioning for a viral clip. And David's father told a story about his first job and how he knew character when he saw it, and my aunt who always wanders into gossip stayed on track because she had a timer in front of her, and then, right on schedule. The coordinator tapped the laptop and pulled up a slide that looked exactly like vendor credits, which it was, before it became something else, because 3 clicks later the room was reading a short clean sentence in a neutral font that said, from Brittany's messages, followed by the date and the line about how surprises are the only thing that stop people from being bored and how a reveal wins a room faster than any cake, and I did not speak or look at anyone. I just let the words sit there while mouth stayed open and the silence got heavy in a way you can feel in your ribs. Brittany stood so fast her chair scraped, announcing that I had manipulated private messages and that this was harassment of a family member who had only ever tried to bring joy. Which would have landed better if the second quote had not appeared with the date that matched a cousin's baby shower and the line where she said she would save it for the crowd because eyes are the only currency that matter. And I watched her fiancé's mother go from polite confusion to crisp understanding in the span of one inhale, and my mother half rose with the reflex of a lifelong fire blanket before sitting back down when the coordinator, calm as a flight attendant, pressed the talk button and invited Brittany to give her scheduled 2-minute thanks right after my father, reminding everyone cheerfully that the couple had asked for short and sweet because there was dessert waiting, which drew a ripple of laughter that broke the tension just enough for the truth to keep moving. My father spoke first with a voice that had a little more grit than usual, saying he was proud of a daughter who learned to hold a line when it mattered, and that he loved both his girls enough to hope we would stop handing each other matches, and then he sat. And the coordinator looked to Brittany with the button ready, and I watched my sister wrestle with the reality that a performance requires a stage, and a stage requires power, and power had just been moved out of her hands, so she grabbed at dignity instead and launched into a speech about forgiveness and how families misunderstand the ones who shine, but the button did not click because nothing had been approved. And the coordinator smiled and said, "Please begin with congratulations to the couple and keep to the time you agreed to," which is when Brittany blurted that she would not be muzzled by a petty rule written by an insecure bride. And the room shifted the way rooms do when a mask slides off in good lighting. I did not answer her directly because I have learned that arguing with a person mid-performance turns you into the second act of their show, so I thanked the room for honoring the guideline, and I thanked Brittany for agreeing to speak within it. Then I lifted my phone and, without a flourish, read a single line from her message to me where she demanded 5 minutes because she had things to say, and I said we had kept our promise by giving her the slot, and we would keep it by protecting the boundary for everyone, and the coordinator pressed the button and offered Brittany her 2 minutes again, and for a blink I thought she might take it and course correct, but the fury that had always gotten her rewarded at home had nowhere to go here. So she pushed her chair back, told her future mother-in-law that we were small people who could not handle big moments, and left a dented hush behind her that filled, slowly, and then all at once, with the sound of relatives exhaling as if someone had finally opened a window in a house that had been stale for years. David squeezed my hand under the table like a man who has just watched a storm pass without touching the house, and people began talking again, and dessert arrived, and the coordinator handed me the little push-to-talk device like a souvenir I had earned. But just when I let myself believe we had reached the plateau before the easy descent into the wedding day, my phone buzzed with a notification that made the skin on my arms tighten, because someone had forwarded me a screenshot of a scheduled post on Brittany's account for the morning of the ceremony with the caption that said she had news too important to hold and that she would be sharing it where no one could cut her microphone, which meant that while we had locked the doors in the room, she was already picking the windows online, and the last thing I saw before the screen dimmed was the exact time she had cued it for, a time that would collide perfectly with the moment I was supposed to walk down the aisle. The morning of the ceremony began with the kind of quiet that looks like peace and behaves like a countdown, because even though the sky did not care and the chairs were being arranged and the flowers were doing what flowers do, I knew that somewhere in a queue a post with a bright caption had already been told exactly when to detonate, and the thought of walking toward David while phones lit up with a performance that had nothing to do with vows made me feel that old familiar tug toward apology and accommodation, which is why I decided that if Brittany wanted an audience, she would have to host one on her own time, because today I was not leaving the door ajar for a thief who had never once returned anything she took. I called the coordinator and asked for one last adjustment that did not require permission from anyone who liked chaos, and she agreed without needing a speech because she had read enough rooms to know what we were dealing with. So she added small cards to every seat that said the ceremony was unplugged and that we would share an album afterwards so guests could live in the moment with us. And she instructed the ushers to kindly offer little fabric pouches at the entrance where people could slip their phones until the recessional, not locked or policed, just a moral nudge that felt like hospitality rather than control. And while that alone would not stop the attention economy, it would starve it enough to let the day breathe. Because a scheduled blast loves secrecy more than it loves content, I wrote a short, calm message and set it to go out to the family text thread 1 minute before Brittany's chosen time, thanking everyone for honoring the phone-free ceremony and asking that if they happen to see any personal announcements online during the next hour, they resist the urge to engage or share and simply join us later for dessert and dancing, since we had promised to celebrate other people's milestones on their days, and we were asking them to keep their promise to us on ours. And I read it to David, who said it sounded like dignity with a seatbelt, and he added his name to the end so it would carry both of us and not just the bride who finally grew us fine. I also reached out to our officiant, who had already agreed to redirect any attempted grandstanding with humor, and I asked whether he would be comfortable incorporating one clean line early in the ceremony that would land like a smile and a boundary at the same time, and when he said yes, I felt the gears slide into place. Because what Brittany had always relied on was the assumption that no one would name what she was doing out loud, and today the naming would be gentle, but it would be public. And it would be enough. Guests arrived to a room that felt softer because the phones were put away with a kind of relief people rarely admit they feel, and relatives greeted one another without immediately angling for a photograph. And even my mother seemed grateful to have something concrete to point to when she needed to keep busy hands from picking at old scabs, and when the music began and I took those careful steps toward the person who had carried all these plans beside me, the part of my brain that usually audits the crowd went quiet because the crowd was not a threat anymore. It was a choir that did not know it was singing. The officiant welcomed everyone and said that love thrives where attention is shared rather than stolen, that today we would try something radical by letting the couple have their minutes without competing headlines. And the room laughed in that low way that says message received and no one is offended, and while he spoke the scheduled text slid into the family thread with its calm language, and I did not need to check to know that the cousins who had finally exhaled at the rehearsal would understand, and that David's parents would understand, and, most importantly, that Brittany's future mother would understand, because she had watched last night's mask shift and did not look eager for a sequel. Somewhere between the vows and the rings, Brittany's timed post went live with the triumphant tone I could have transcribed in my sleep, because if there is one thing my sister believes in more than romance, it is the thrill of the release. Yet the release fell into a room that had its hands folded, because the people who would have given it oxygen were sitting in chairs listening to two people promise ordinary difficult things to one another, and the ones at home had just been asked to wait 1 hour out of respect, and by the time anyone picked up their phone, the moment had shifted and the hunger had passed, and the comments under her announcement did not explode into applause so much as drift into polite postponement. With the first reply from her future mother reading that today belonged to the couple and that they would share joy with Brittany on another day soon. After the kiss and the turn and the slow walk back through the aisle of people whose faces looked a little lighter for having been spared the job of referee, we stepped into a courtyard where the coordinator handed me my phone like a baton I had already earned. And she said that the reminder message had done exactly what it needed to do because the thread was full of hearts and acknowledgments and the kind of support that keeps drama from crystallizing. And when I finally opened the app that holds too much of our lives, I saw Brittany's post sitting there like a firework that fizzled in the tube, and beneath it a handful of relatives had left a variation of the same sentence, that they loved her and could not wait to celebrate her news on her day, which is another way of saying the currency had been devalued and the market had closed. We moved through the reception with the ease that comes when nothing else is bleeding the air, and when toasts began the laughter felt earned rather than defensive, and my father, who avoids taking sides until there are no sides left to take, stood and said he had watched his daughter build a boundary and keep it without turning mean, and that he could not be prouder of a woman who understood that love without limits becomes a mess that someone always has to clean, and he sat down with eyes that said he finally knew which daughter had been doing the cleanup all along. I did not seek Brittany out because victory that needs an audience is just another performance, and I did not gloat because peace is not loud. But when we sent our thank you note that night with a link to the photo album and the same little card we had tucked into the chairs, I added one last line that made David grin in the way that reminds me why I chose him. That we were grateful for every person who helped keep all eyes where they belong today, and that anyone with big news was welcome to send us their invite so we could show up and clap like crazy on their day, and I went to sleep with that rare feeling that does not leave a residue, knowing that I had not changed who my sister was or who my mother would always be, but I had changed what I would tolerate. And that is how the tables turn without you flipping them. So when I woke up to silence instead of sirens, I finally believed the thing I had rehearsed in my head for years, but never said out loud, that it was my turn, and it would stay my turn because I had learned how to hold it.